Hi everyone, I'm Nick, a facilitator here at Princeton-Blairstown Center, and today I'm going to talk to you about picking the perfect campsite. If you're interested in going camping, you should definitely plan it out first. That way, when you get to the camp, you have everything ready that you need. And one part of that, you can actually start picking the perfect campsite before you even get to your campsite. So, for example, we're here on the Blue Trail right now. And the Blue Trail, as you can see, intersects with a campsite called Lone Pine, where my finger is. We're actually going to head to Lone Pine today. And because I looked at the map before we left, chose the campsite in advance, now I know, A, there should already be a campsite ready for me, and B, somebody knows where I am. That's part of the safety thing, you see? If you're going camping, you should definitely let somebody know where you're going first. That way, if something happens, they know where to look for you. I also have other safety measures. For instance, I have a first aid kit in my backpack. I'm also carrying a radio. At the other end is my boss, Mark. So that way, if something happens, somebody knows where we are and where to start looking. So let's go ahead and start getting to the Lone Pine campsite. We're gonna leave the Blue Trail, and you can see this trail here. As I've already passed all the other intersections on this trail, that makes this last one the campsite. Here we go. Here it is, Lone Pine campsite. Take a look around. Pretty neat place, huh? One of the first signs that we made it to the proper campsite is the fact that we have a campfire ring. Now, campfire rings are pretty important for a couple of reasons. A, it lets us know that we found a campsite. If we didn't find a campfire ring, that means we're probably in the wrong spot. Since we found one, we can be pretty sure that we found it. The second reason a campfire ring is important is because of environmental impact. If we just found a random place to camp and we just built a fire wherever we wanted, then we could set the forest on fire, we could make a big burn mark in the middle of the ground. There's a lot of things. The fact that there's an established campfire ring is good for the woods and for ourselves. That's why we have it. Over here is a cooking platform. Now, at PBC we have a lot of different cooking platforms at a lot of different campsites. However, that might not be the case at other places. If you're camping in a national park or a state park or even just a random hiking trail that you found, they might not all have these. Just because we have them at PBC doesn't mean that it's an international kind of thing. Now you can see that the campfire ring and the cooking platform are relatively close to one another. That's going to form one part of what we're going to call our bear triangle. And we'll get there in a minute. And when I say bear triangle, I mean roar, bears, not bear like alone. Come on over this way. Now, you can see that some of this has been tended to. The flat ground, the fact that it's worn down on the trail we just walked on, some of the cut down trees. Actually, some of those look like they might have been from beavers. Huh, very neat. Well, you can see that this has been tended to, even though that we had to duck to get through that brush. You saw me do that? Well, since we had to duck to get through that brush, that means that maybe somebody hasn't been here in a while. Now, sometimes it's difficult to tell how often a campsite is maintained. Here at Princeton-Blairstown Center, we maintain our campsites relatively frequently. In fact, my friend Tabs and I recently just did this campsite itself. So, when you're out in the woods though, and you're going to a national park or a state park, how can you tell that a campsite's been maintained? The answer is it's not. And that's kind of the small problem, is you might have a hard time finding the campsite you're looking for because nobody's been there in a while. Now, we did have to duck to get through some of that brush, but the trail still exists, there's still flat parts, the campfire ring is still there, and it's overall a very well-established campsite. Now, just because it's hard to find in the middle of the woods doesn't mean you should just forget it entirely. If you start just making a campsite in the middle of nowhere, again, it comes into that environmental impact. If you start placing a tent or building a fire, now you're leaving a mark that might not be erased for a long time. For instance, nobody's been here in a while, but you can still see that it's here. Just because you decide to go camping one place doesn't mean it's going to be overgrown for a long time. So remember to make sure of that when you're looking for your campsite. Don't give up if you have a hard time finding it. Let's go back towards the fire. Now, remember earlier when I mentioned the bear triangle? And again, not a triangle that's by itself, but a triangle of 4 bears, the animal. That was actually the second part of the bear triangle. I didn't mention it though. The reason is that I'm going to explain that a little bit more in a moment, but I wanted to show you that we're walking in a triangle everywhere that we go. So I came over there, I followed the same path back to the fire, and then we're going to come over here in a moment. Once again, we're at a different part of the bear triangle. Now, I know a triangle has 3 sides, but this really only has 2 sides, but 3 points. That's why we're going to call it a triangle. This part here is where I'm going to be camping tonight. The part over there that I mentioned is where we're going to hang up our bear bag. Now, when I'm looking for a place to sleep for the night, what are some things I should be looking out for? Say it again? That's a great point. Anything that could possibly disrupt my sleep or even hurt me. We're going to talk a little bit about how we can more easily remember those kind of things. I actually have a little graphic over here to show you. I know, I should have brought it with me over here. Silly me. So, when we're looking for a campsite, we're going to look for the 4 W's. Now, the 4 W's stand for wind, water, wildlife, and widowmakers. Now, maybe some of these terms are unfamiliar to you, or perhaps you don't quite know why I wrote them down, and that's what we're going to talk about. First off, wind. When we look around the campsite, we don't see a lot that the wind has done. We don't see a lot of fallen over trees. We don't see dust getting kicked up all over the place. It's a pretty calm day, and the fact that we have so many of these big strong trees shows that it really kind of breaks the wind for us, so we're not getting blasted with wind. If we were in a flat area, let's say a desert, or if we were really close to the lake over there and the wind was to come off of the lake, it would blow us away. It'd be really hard to set up a tent in that kind of condition, much less sleep in it. It can make things dangerous. And I'll explain why in a moment, because it's further down on the list. But the second off is water. Now, I don't mean the water that I brought with me here in my backpack to drink, but I mean water that comes naturally. Water from the lake, water from rain, or other types of water, you know? When we look around, we don't see any washout, or things that look like they've been moved by water. Have you ever looked at a river or a stream, and on the sides, all the grass is kind of pushed the same direction, or all the rocks are sort of smooth, or you see the dirt getting pushed up in little piles? That's water runoff, and that is what we're trying to avoid. Just because we don't see water itself doesn't mean that it's not a place water might appear. So, when we're looking for those kind of stream elements, we're making sure that we're not going to end up soaking wet in our sleeping bags. Wildlife is the third thing on the list. There are a lot of different ways to find wildlife. For instance, holes that a gopher might live in, or something called a game trail. What other types of wildlife signs do you think you might find? A little bit louder? That's right. Footprints, scat, fur, antlers. Those are all great answers. But when we're looking for those things, we want to make sure that we're not someplace where wildlife might come towards us, or we might be disrupting the wildlife. For instance, when we go back over to look at where I'm going to be putting my tent, let's see if we see any sort of gopher holes or a game trail. Let's see if we find any scat or antlers. We'll take a look. The last one is widowmakers. Now, that's not an everyday term. In fact, there are a lot of people who probably aren't sure what it means. Let's break it down for a moment. Widowmakers are something that could severely hurt us. And it might be a little bit of an outdated term, but it means that we leave the people at home for good. We don't want that happening to us. Most specifically, widowmakers are dead trees, or things that could potentially fall on us. Now, don't get me wrong, some of the other examples in the W signs could become like a widowmaker in a sense, but widowmakers in this context specifically mean dead trees and branches. So let's go ahead and look up. Do you see any dead trees, branches, anything that might fall on us? Take a good look. Well, I'm not seeing any myself, and that's a good sign. There aren't any signs of rotten wood, of any trees that have been struck by lightning, hollow trees. There's a whole lot of things that could be called widowmakers. And I'm not seeing any, and I think that makes for a pretty safe campsite. Now, let's say that you don't camp on an established campsite in something called backcountry camping. A lot of times you're going to need a permit for that, and you should be a little bit more experienced with camping before you try that. But that's when these really come into play, the 4 Ws. When you're going backcountry camping and you're establishing a camp that isn't frequently used, that means it's more likely to have one or more of these 4 things. This campsite is not only frequently used, but well maintained. So as a result, we don't really have to worry about this too much. But we're going to double check anyway. Why do you think that is? That's right. A lot of things can change between different maintenance schedules and uses. So that's why we're going to check these things out. So let's go check out where I'm going to set up the tent, and then we'll see if we can find the 4 Ws. Hopefully not. So let's say I want to set up the tent in this flat area here, or a shelter of some sort even. Let's go ahead and check through the 4 Ws. The first W is wind. Do we see any fallen down trees or any dust getting kicked up anywhere? Perfect timing. In fact, a small breeze just came in, and we can see that not a lot is getting kicked up or moved around, and since the weather report didn't say we're supposed to expect some severe wind, I think that we could check that one off the list. The second one is water. Take a look at the ground. Does it look like a stream might run through here? Are there any leaves pushed around? Sticks? Rocks? I'm not seeing any. Take a look up now. I don't see any clouds. No rain, no snow predicted. Nothing like that. And finally, let's take a listen. Just be real quiet and see if you can hear any water. I'm not hearing any personally. I don't hear a stream or a river, and in fact, we can see on the map that we're a pretty decent ways away from the lake. So that being said, I think we could check water off of the list. Let's take a look for wildlife. Check the ground one more time. Do you see any gopher holes or snake holes? Do you see any footprints? Perhaps a game trail where a deer might be walking? Do you see any scat samples? I'm not seeing any, so I think that's a good sign. Finally, widowmakers. Let's take a look up again and see if there are any dead trees, any dead branches, anything that could potentially fall on us. Looks like all the trees around us are pretty sturdy and alive. As a result, we can check off the 4 Ws. That means that this is a safe place to camp, and this would be the perfect place to set up our site. Now, finally, time for me to get around to that bear triangle I keep putting off. If this is where we're going to set up our tent, and all the way over there is where our campfire ring is going to be, and then past that is where I talked about where we'd put a bear bag, That makes 3 points, right? And a triangle also has 3 points. Our 3 points on our bear triangle, just to review, are where the tent will be, where we're going to have our fire and cooking, and where we're going to hang up the bear bag. The reason behind this is because bears are really attracted to anything that smells good, even if it's not food. It could be things like toothpaste. Bears, they're not very picky eaters, let's put it that way. And we don't want to be camping someplace where we might accidentally attract bears. So we're going to take our tent, put it further away from where the cooking is going to happen, because that's where we're most likely to spill things or leave a scent. And then the cooking is going to be separate from where we're going to have our bear bag. Now, the bear bag is something where we string up a bag way up high on a branch that a bear can't reach from the ground and can't reach if he climbs the tree. So it's sort of the in-between space when we hang up the bag with a long piece of rope. That way it protects what we call our smellables, things that can be smelled. Smelled? They have a scent. Things that have a smell we don't want the bear getting into, because then he's gonna take our breakfast for the next morning, or he might take all my toothpaste when I'm trying to brush my teeth the next day. We don't want that happening. That's why we separate the 3 different places. Cooking is gonna have the strongest scent. The bear bag is gonna have the next strongest scent. And that's why we want those 2 separate places to be from our 3rd point where we're going to be camping. Does that make sense? Thumbs up if it does. I'm glad to hear that. Well, that's about all the time we have today. I wish I could show you setting up a tent or building a campfire, but unfortunately it looks like it's getting a little late. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you in person after this whole thing is over, and I'm looking forward to having a lot more people here at Princeton-Blairstown Center. I'm Nick, and hope to see you soon. Be safe now. Bye-bye.